The tide seems to be turning against the long-held faith in economic growth as the solution to all our ills. Commentators on both the left and the right are talking about going beyond GDP. So what is GDP and what's wrong with it? GDP, or Gross Domestic Product to give it its proper name, is just one of a number of ways of measuring national income. When people talk about beyond GDP, they're talking about all of these. GDP, GNP, GNI. Now the differences in those is a topic for another day, but GDP is kind of the blanket term by how all these measures are known collectively. So hence the widespread use of beyond GDP. In simple terms, GDP is a measure of how big the national economic pie is, and economic growth is the measure of how quickly that pie is growing. Now, people often talk about GDP as if it was handed down from God on tablets of stone, but it's actually a relatively recent invention. It's actually less than 100 years old. You can actually date its emergence to the 4th of January 1934, when an economist, Simon Kuznets, presented the first report on US national income to Congress. Why GDP was created then actually tells us a lot about what is good about GDP. The 1930s was, of course, the Great Depression, when unemployment and poverty spiraled out of control in America and around the world. What Kuznets' report to Congress was part of an effort to measure what was going on in the economy to help them manage this crisis. But Kuznets' report actually did much more than that. It helped rewrite the rules on what policymakers were trying to achieve with economic policy. You see, before GDP, economic orthodoxy was dominated by the idea of sound finance, which was all about maintaining the value of your national currency against gold. Growing the economic pie was not a priority. Indeed, if protecting the value of your currency against gold meant shrinking the pie, causing unemployment and poverty, so be it, said the lords of finance of that day. So the awful experience of the 90s and the Great Depression caused a rethink and a focus instead not on sound finance, as it was known, but on economic growth, growing the pie, which of course is measured by GDP. So that's how GDP came to dominate the world, because it's useful. It helps governments, businesses, investors make decisions about when to borrow and when to invest. And as a tool, GDP's done pretty well. It's guided the global economy through an unprecedented period of development. Just to give you one example, back in 2000, the United Nations agreed to a plan called the Millennium Development Goals to halve world poverty by 2015. Quite frankly, I don't think anyone ever expected to achieve it. But we did, and we did because principally of economic growth in China and India. So if economic growth has been delivering for us like that, what's the grumbling about? Why are people grumbling about GDP? Well, actually there are four main reasons. First, it doesn't measure everything that's valuable, only things for which money changes hands. Community and friendship are valueless through the lens of GDP because no one pays for them. Housework, cooking, cleaning, looking after the kids, a burden that still falls mainly on women, is unpaid, so it's not counted by GDP. Indeed, the non-counting of housework was one factor that caused the creator of GDP, Simon Kuznets, to give up on GDP as a measure. The second problem with GDP is that some activity that's measured by GDP does no good or even does harm. According to GDP, an earthquake or a natural disaster looks like good news because it leads to lots of economic activity in the reconstruction. Worse, GDP can also make bad things look good. For example, all the money that Russia is spending on rockets and missiles to attack Ukraine with is all adding to Russia's GDP numbers. These aren't good things, but GDP counts them as being positive. Third, GDP tells us how big the pie is, but it doesn't tell you how it's divided, who gets which slices. GDP has nothing to say about fairness and equity. Economies can grow without benefiting the majority of the population, as we've actually seen in the last 30 years in the United States. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, GDP has nothing to say about sustainability. GDP doesn't count the cost of economic activities, the way economic activities deplete our natural resources or create problems like climate change. These problems have always been known. Even in that first report in 1934, Simon Kuznets warned that GDP should not be used as a measure of well-being. So why is beyond GDP getting a lot of attention now? I think for two reasons. One is the big issue of the climate crisis. A benchmark, a measure that says nothing about sustainability, that doesn't help us tackle the biggest problem in the world, is increasingly found to be lacking. And I think the second reason is because we are seeing there's a widening gap, a widening disparity between economic progress and social progress, particularly in the rich world. But I think a bit more on that perhaps in another video. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to know more about how social progress imperative is leading the way beyond GDP, check out our website at socialprogress.org.